نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بديع السماوات والأرض أنى يكون له ولد ولم تكن له صاحبة وخلق كل شيء وهو بكل شيء عليم. ذلكم الله ربكم لا إله إلا هو خالق كل شيء فاعبدوه وهو على كل شيء وكيل. Respectful honorable friends, the verses recited to you, in it the opening verse, the tafsir of which we had completed last week, but I've reread it, as from it there are things that I would like to mention, similar to what I mentioned in the Jummah Bayan today, with regards to the issue of the cartoons of Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the issue of Facebook. In this verse which we had done last week, the reason I've recited it is because in it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions something that was ascribed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the mushrikeen and by disbelievers, and something which he also mentions in the previous verses, that وَخَرَقُوا لَهُ بَنِينَ وَبَنَاتٍ, that the disbelievers had ascribed and they had linked with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sons and daughters, something that they had made up. And in this verse as well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that وَلِيُّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَلَدُهُ, He is the originator of the heavens and the earth. أَنَّا يَكُونُ لَهُ وَلَدٌ, how can there be for him a son? وَلَمْ تَكُنْ لَهُ صَاحِبَةٌ, and there is not for him a partner, a wife. Now we find that when it comes to the habits of the disbelievers, that it isn't something new. From the onset we find that even with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala they had this attitude where they ascribed matters with Allah which did not belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They held others as partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They had given Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sons and daughters. So these were things, attributes which do not belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which they had attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the same way we find with Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well. And one of the habits of the disbelievers, and what we are faced with today, isn't something new. It has always been there in the past, but rather it has been a lot stronger and greater in the past. And we find in history that there were always times when people had caused pain and people had caused difficulty to our beloved Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And one of the main reasons for this is that when Nabi Kareem sallallahu ta'ala sallam stood up with the message of Tawheed, and when Nabi Kareem sallallahu ta'ala sallam gave the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mankind, it was a message which they disliked. It was a message which was against the norm of the time. It was a message which took them away from that which they were doing. It was a message which deprived them and prevented them and stopped them from fulfilling their own desires and worshipping as they wished, or worshipping as their forefathers and ancestors had done so. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam had given the message of Tawheed to the mushrikeen of Makkah. The same mushrikeen of Makkah who were idol worshippers. The same mushrikeen of Makkah who could not comprehend the worship of one Zat and one being, as they were those mushrikeen who had a separate God for each and every single matter. They had hundreds of different gods, and they would even change their gods every so often. If they would be traveling and they would find a stone which looked a lot better than the stone that they had, a stone which looked more beautiful or shine more, the color was unique, they would throw the previous stone away which they had taken as their deity, and they would start worshipping this stone. They would have miniature stones, miniature gods with them which they would take with them in travel. This is the case, and this is how they were and how deep they were into shirk. Now when Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam was granted Nabuwwat, Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught them something totally opposite to that which they believed in. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught them that look, Allah is one. Allah is one. And because Allah is one, then La ilaha illallah. There is none worthy of worship but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Illallah. No Lat, no Manat, no Uzza. No other deities that you have formed and created from your own and you have given names from yourselves. No, only one ilah, and that one ilah is Allah. Only Allah alone. It was a message which they disliked. And the reason why they didn't like it is because Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam was calling them towards something, or calling them away from that which they had found their ancestors, their forefathers on. And because it was something that they had found their forefathers on, they didn't even wish to comprehend or wish to even try and understand why is it that our forefathers were worshipping idols. And when they would be challenged that if they want to stay and remain on the false beliefs that they have, then they should bring proof to it. They should have proof to why they want to worship idols. There are many proofs to why we should worship only one Allah. And in the previous ruku we did the various ayats of Allah, the various signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the various manifestations of the qudrat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which clearly indicated towards the oneness of Allah, which indicated towards the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which was so many signs, so many proofs to the fact and to prove the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Over and over in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given such ayat, such indications, such open signs which give proof towards the fact that we should worship only one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But now when it came to them giving proof to why they should worship idols, and now when they were faced with this new religion, with this new concept of worshipping only Allah and not to bow towards handmade idols and to turn away from shirk, now they were faced with a great dilemma, a great and unique dilemma. Why? Because the message given at the time was better than the message that they were giving. The message given at the time was much purer, or absolutely pure and pristine to that which they were calling towards. Their character, from them, those who were calling towards the worship of idols, had many flaws in it and weakness. But the character who was calling people towards the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the biggest of enemies of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, couldn't even find any fault in him. Wouldn't be able to find any fault in Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A long incident, but I'm not going to mention it if it's incomplete. But Sayyidina Abu Sufyan radiallahu ta'ala, before he became a Muslim, when he had gone for business, and when he was there at Palestine, where Hirakal had also come to, and at that time, Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent Sayyidina Al-Kalbi radiallahu ta'ala with his letter as an ambassador. And at that time, when Hirakal had called and asked, is there anybody who has come from the location of this Nabi? And when Abu Sufyan was summoned and Abu Sufyan was asked with regards to Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even Abu Sufyan could not mention anything to ridicule Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He didn't. And each question he was asked, he answered it correctly. And Hirakal had mentioned to the other companions of Abu Sufyan who had come with him from Hijaz, that if he speaks a lie, then reprimand him. If he speaks a lie, then you tell the truth. Sayyidina Abu Sufyan knew that if he wanted to ridicule Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then his companions behind him would have supported him. They would have supported him. But even then he disliked knowing that his